Okay, good evening. Welcome back after the summer break. I hope you all had a very good and refreshing summer. For those who are new, the plan for this shiur is we split it into two parts. The first 15 minutes is Halacha, and each week is a different topic. It's a contemporary halachic topic related somehow to the parsha. And Mr. Shem, as we come to Yom Tov, we'll relate it to Yom Tov. And then we have a parsha shiur, some different ideas on the parsha. And again, as it comes to Yom Tov, we'll focus a little bit more on that. So this week's Halacha shiur is entitled Finders, Keepers, and the Case of the Fraudulent TzedakaCollector. Very interesting topic, and related to this week's parsha, Parshas Kiseitze. The Pasuk says in Dvarim Chaf Beis, Lo siro es shar achicha ayeseu, do not see the ox of your brother or his sheep, nidachim, they're straying, v'hisalam domehem, and you pretend not to see it. Hashev teshivim la'achicha. You have to return it. This is the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. Parshas Kiseitze is replete with mitzvahs, and there's dozens. And this is one of them, Hashavas Aveda, returning lost property. Now, what I want to do is just give you a little bit of an outline about the halachas of Hashavas Aveda. It's a well-known topic, but what are the practicalities of it? What does that mean? And then to discuss this case of the fraudulent TzedakaCollector, which is related to the concept of Hashavas Aveda. So first things first, does it apply to women? You find a lost item, does it apply to women? Well, the rule is generally, what are the rules when it comes to women and mitzvahs? When it comes to negative mitzvahs, women are mechuyev as much as men. Just like a man can't speak Lashon Hara, a woman can't speak Lashon Hara. A man can't eat treif, a woman can't eat treif. That's not an issue. The question is, positive mitzvahs. And when it comes to positive mitzvahs, we make a distinction between time-bound and non-time-bound mitzvahs. If it's non-time-bound, mitzvah saseh shelo hazman groma, so then women are as mechuyev as men. They're obligated like men. What's an example of a positive non-time-bound mitzvah? It's not easy ways to think of that. An example of a positive non-time-bound mitzvah would be mezuzah, tzedakah, non-time-bound. So, for example, if some women share an accommodation together, they live in a flat together in Sem or wherever it may be, they're mechuyev, they're obligated to put up a mezuzah. If it's tzedakah or whatever it may be. Mitzvah saseh shehazman grom, which are time-bound, that is where women are potter. Lulav, shofar, sukkah, tefillin, tzitzis. Again, there's discussions about all of these things. But basically, they're time-bound mitzvahs, and women are exempt from that. Now, if they want to, they can. Some of them they can. That's the issue. What is Hashavas Aveda? Hashavas Aveda is not time-bound. It doesn't make a difference if it's day or if it's night. It's not time-bound, and therefore women are obligated in Hashavas Aveda just like a man. And therefore, if you take a look at the second box, if you're listening online, please email me j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. For those who've got the handout in front of you, the second box is a Gemara in Kiddushin Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, "Eizehu mitzvah saseh sheloi hazman groma." What is a positive mitzvah which is not time-bound, i.e., that women are obligated to keep? So he gives a few examples: mezuzah, ma'akeh, putting a fence around a roof, or which is lived on, aveda and hashavas aveda. So therefore, men and women are equally mechuyev in Hashavas Aveda. Okay. Now, other background rules about Hashavas Aveda before we come to our case scenario. Number one, it must be lost. In other words, it's clear that the owner dropped it unknowingly. Not that he actually deliberately put it aside. So for example, I don't know about in your streets, where I live, in my street, in Woodlands, many people, they'll leave things at the end of their drive, and people will come by and take it out, like an old chest of drawers, a fridge, a broken snooker table, and it pretty much goes quickly, interestingly. So that is not Aveda. It's got to be something which is lost, but if it's obviously abandoned, then there's no obligation to return it. It has to have a minimum worth. How much is the minimum worth? A pruta, which could be as little as 5p. So we're not talking about a large amount of money. The mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda applies as long as the item is the owner expects and hopes the item will be found and returned. But once he has given up hope, yiush, then there is no obligation of Hashavas Aveda. Now that is a very important point. Because once the owner of this item has given up hope, then you don't have to return it. So for example, I remember as a kid, my father, Shalom, took us on Sunday, one Sunday morning, he took us to the Hampstead Pond. And you remember the donkey rides there when we were kids there. And I remember one time I found, I think it was a £5 note or a £10 note. Now back in the day, that was, for a kid, that was worth something. And a person loses a £10 note, there's no simon, there's no identifying feature on a £10 note, so a person can keep it. Why can you keep it? Because who the owner has given up hope of finding it. It's an unidentified object. He's given up hope. So those are the broad parameters of the mitzvah. Of course, there's lots of detail. There's a whole parag in Bava Metzia about it. It's a classic Gemara that boys learn in school, Bava Metzia, and learn beyond in Eilu Metzias. But those are the basic rules of Hashavas Haveda. If an item has a siman, which means some sort of identifying feature, then we can assume the owner has not given up hope, because that is a sign that he's going to get it back. So, for example, a phone. You could press on the phone. It could be in case of emergency, or there's your photo on the front page, or whatever it may be. Often a phone will have an identifying feature, a siman, and therefore that would suggest that the owner has not given up hope, which means you've got an obligation to return it. So those are the broad background general rules when it comes to Hashavas Aveda. Now, let's turn to our case scenario. The fraudulent TzedakaCollector. Take a look at paragraph 3 at the bottom. This is a shaila that came to the Chashukei Chemed, who is Rabbi Zilberstein. He, like we've mentioned him a few times here in the past, he seems to be a magnet for some very interesting, unusual cases. And here's an interesting case. It says, this is a Chashukei Chemed in Bava Metzia Chaf Alaf on the base. This is the question that was put to him. Ma'aseh she'ira happened one time, but Adam shekibetz kasafim bebeis hakneses. There was a man who was going around shul collecting money. And as people do, they go around, they have a hamlotza. Hamlotza means a letter of authentication showing that that I'm legitimate and some rabbi has approved my particular case. One of the people went to the rabbi's house. He noticed that this hamlotza, this approbation, was fraudulent. The rabbi didn't know anything about it. So they put him in cherim, they sort of withdrew the approbation. And now they're asking, this fellow has fraudulently collected who knows how much money, hundreds, maybe thousands, who knows how much money. Now what do you do with the money? Who'd you give it back to? He may have collected, gone around many shuls, knocked on many, many doors. What do you do with the money that he's collected? Can you just get to keep it halachically? Or have you got to take it away from him? And give it to poor people. Or maybe you should put it to the public good. I don't know, whatever that may be. So a very interesting case. A fraudulent TzedakaCollector goes around using made up letter of approbation from some rabbi who knew nothing about this. What to do with the money that was collected? Okay. Says Rabbi Zilberstein. Look at the bottom paragraph on the first page. Tshuva. He quotes another tshuva. B'shaylas and Tshuva's based Yisrael. Yisrael Zev Horovitz. Don b'she'ela ka'inzu. He had a very similar question. Ish echod bo lifnei harav. A certain guy came to a rabbi. Ubikesh menu litzen lemelitza. He wanted an approbation with his handwriting on it. This is, I guess, goes back, I don't know when exactly, maybe the 19th century or something, where the fellow said, my son has been drafted, or he's been captured, and I need money to redeem him. So this is a case of pigeon shavuyim, which is a very, very high on the priority list of tzedakah. The rabbi felt bad for him, of course, and he wrote a letter of approbation so he can collect money to redeem his son. And the fellow went round from town to town to collect money. And it transpired that it was one big fraud. Not only that, not only was it a made-up story, but the fellow didn't even have a son. So it was all the whole thing was made up. And this guy was a serial fraudulent tzedakah collector because he had gone to another Rav and he told this other rabbi that he's got a daughter to marry off, he can't afford to make a wedding. And again, so he had a different story each time. And this fellow didn't have a son, didn't have a daughter, and the whole thing was made up. And the question that came to the Rav was, what to do with the money that was collected? Has the guy acquired them, they're now his? Or can we take them from him to use them for the public good? To give them to other poor people, because he's took them all with fraud like any thief. So that is the question. Now, let's go through his answer. Again, it's a short halacha shir, so we're not going to explore it in depth, but I'll just read through the answer. It's fascinating. V'heishiv. This is the answer that the Beis Yisrael answered on the second question about the fellow who pretended he had a son who needed to be redeemed and a daughter who was getting married. Shelechora. This is what he said. Shelechora yesh lemoisdin shel yiyush shelemedas. This comes under the category, famous, well-known category of yiyush shelemedas. Now, what does that mean? Yiyush means, like I said earlier, the owner has given up hope, but it's yiyush shelemedas. Now, what does that mean? Let's say, for example, I lose my wallet, and I walk home from Shiur this evening, and it falls out. I could put my hand in my pocket, and by mistake it falls out. And let's say I lose it at 9:30 this evening, and I don't get home. I've got a few errands to do. I don't get home till 10:30, so I don't discover that it's lost until 10:30 at night. And let's say someone finds it at 9:45. So it's Yiush, but Shalom Adas. I don't know that I've even lost it. So what is the halacha with Yiush Shalom Adas, where the person doesn't even know that he's lost it yet? How do you treat that situation? So that is dealt with in the Gemara. This is a big topic in the Gemara in Eilu Metzias, and it's machlokas Abai and Rava, and we pass it like Abai. The Gemara says shekayim on kabay shelo have Yiush. That's not considered losing hope. If you don't know that you've lost it, you can't say that you've given up hope of losing it, of finding it. And therefore, if I haven't given up hope, it still belongs to me. Even though they'll tell the people who are giving money to this fellow, this fraudulent collector, that you shouldn't have given it to him because he's disreputable. But it's not called Yiush. Technically, therefore, the money still belongs to the people who gave it to him. So say he's got £10,000 made up of 1,000 people's £10 note. So those 1,000 people still own the £10 which they gave him. Because it's Yiush Shelemedas and it's not considered Yiush. However, he concludes that you don't have to return it. Because the Kesef Mishnah writes on the Rambam, when do we say that Abaya holds Yiush Shelemedas is not considered Yiush, is not considered abandoned, that he hasn't given up hope? That only means that I can't take it yet. But if I did, then I acquire it. Since this money has no identifying feature, like I mentioned earlier, and therefore, the Beis Yisrael will conclude that this fraudulent collector has actually acquired this money because the person, there's no identifying feature, and therefore he has acquired it. Says Rabbi Zilberstein, I don't agree. Second paragraph, this is not a case of Yiush Shelemedas. I'll tell you why. Because when someone knocks on our door and we give them something, we have we've said goodbye to that money. We have no expectation of ever receiving it back. He's not expecting in any time to ever receive this money back. I thought I was giving this money to pigeon shvuim or to marry off this daughter, or whatever it may be. This guy's just stolen it. This is considered theft. And therefore I've abandoned hope of ever getting this money back. Next paragraph, this is not a case of Yiush Shelemedas. Avul gneva yeshkan. This is just pure theft. V'chayev lahachzira afilu minisyash. And therefore, this man is obligated to return the money. But the question is, who does he return it to? There was a case. I heard this over the summer. I can't remember if I mentioned it before the summer break. But there was a case, an amazing thing. Rabbi Shai Shechter, the son of Rabbi Hershel Shechter, is a very choshev Rav in America. And he learnt in the Shiur of Rabbi Osher Arieli. Rabbi Osher Arieli is probably the biggest Shiur in the world. It's a Shiur in the Mir, and I think he has 900 participants, 900 younger men and Bachrim. It's the elite Shiur in the world today. And many years ago, Rabbi Shai Shechter was in the Shiur, and he said that after the Shiur, there was a time when he would go back with a few boys to do Chazar with Rabbi Osher in his house. And I think he lives in Sanhedria, and the boys went into his house. And they noticed one time when they went in, there was a washing line that came, imagine an Israeli dira, there was a washing line that went through the corridor in the hallway, and they were drying clothes on it. So Rabbi Shai Shechter thought to himself, Rabbi Osher Arieli, the greatest Magashir, one of the greatest Magashir in our time, if we could do a collection between 800, I think there were boys at the time in the Shiur, it's not going to take a lot of money from each person to buy the person a drying machine, a dryer. So he collected 2 shekel, 50p. Shekel's not so good at the moment, or the pound's not so good at the moment, whatever it is, from every boy in the Shiur. And that way, they came some weeks later, they presented Rabbi Osher with a dryer. And Rabbi Osher turned around to Rabbi Shai Shechter and he said, look, I'm really grateful for what you've given us. And it's very thoughtful, and my wife and I really appreciate it. I want to tell you something. When we got married, this is many decades ago, my wife and I spoke and we decided we want to have a certain standard of living. And we wanted this, and we didn't want to have a drying machine. We wanted to have the laundry line, and we're very happy. We're used to it. We've lived like this for decades. I don't want a dryer. My wife doesn't want a dryer, but thank you very much. And this fellow, he said it was such a nightmare. He had to return 800 shekel to 200 people. I think it worked out 1 shekel and 70 agarot or something, or 80 agarot to each person. But you got the same problem. This fellow's collected. Where do you return the money? He's been around to dozens of houses, dozens of shuls. Where do you return the money? Because it's Ma'aseh Gneva. There's no Yiush here. No one's given up hope. However, says Rabbi Zilberstein, you don't have to return the money. Why? Because Chazal say, Bo v'nachzik tov v'dermoim. You don't want to make tshuva too hard. So let's do a chesed for the crook. V'im kein, kol adam hareh oni bilti mochel mahar belibo, when a person knocks on your door, 99% of the time we hope they're going to be honest people, honest collectors. But there is a lingering doubt, perhaps it's not. I remember a guy once came up to me and said, there was a fellow coming around shul, maybe he didn't look so, it looked a bit dubious. And I took out my voucher book, gave him 50p, whatever it was. So the guy said to me, how do you know he's for real? So I said to him, look, I don't know. But let's say he is. 99% he's for real. So I've contributed to his worthy cause. And let's say he's not. So I've given him a coffee. So I've paid for his coffee. Is it such a big deal? And hopefully HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be as generous in his assessment of me, that I'm also maybe not 100, sometimes. So let's, dan lekafschus. So therefore, and basically, Rabbi Zilberstein concludes that a person, when he gives it, he has actually given it without any expectation of giving it back. And therefore, he concludes what really should happen in this situation is that you give it away maybe to other public goods or to other aniyim, to similar cases, l'tzorchei rabim, but there's no obligation to give it back to the individual donors, even if it were somehow possible. So there you have a practical application of Hashavas Aveda, the case of the fraudulent TzedakaCollector. Hashavas Aveda, again, a halacha based on the pasuk in this week's Sedra, a halacha which applies to men and women, and various rules that, as we've said, we've set out in the front page. It's a detailed area and an interesting area, but just to give you a little bit of a flavor of a halacha which is not often spoken about.